Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the fifth installment of the Momcology Caregiver Lounge. We are so excited to be here with you tonight. I'm Capacente. I'm the Director of Operations for Momcology. We're together tonight because back in 2022, we surveyed all of you in the caregiver community about topics that were of interest to pediatric cancer caregivers' health and well-being. And this topic about social support was among those that you felt was very important and a high priority need. So before we get started, I do want to go over a couple of really quick housekeeping things. This is a webinar, so your view only. We can't see or hear you, so feel free to be comfortable as you'd like. Have a nice hot cup of tea, have a snack, be in your jammies. No worries, we can't see you. We will break for questions, but do feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen for any questions or tech issues that you might have as we go through the webinar. With that, I'm excited to welcome both of our guests tonight. We have Larissa from Dana-Farber Cancer Center and Kelsey. They are both licensed clinical social workers and are joining us tonight from Dana-Farber. Ladies, if you can I can't see my screen, so there you are. Sorry, I had a black screen. I was doing all of that from black screen. So I apologize. I was having tech issues tonight. So welcome, ladies, and I'll turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kat, and thank you to everyone for having us here tonight. Kelsey and I are thrilled to be with you. And when we began talking about the possibility of being able to present as part of this Caregiver Lounge series a year ago, Kelsey and I knew almost immediately what we wanted our theme to be. And the focus of our presentation tonight came out of that certainty. And it is something that comes up in our work with patients literally every single day, namely managing the people around us, our support system. Throughout our presentation today, we'll be talking about the need for social support, how to assess your own social support network and get your needs met, and even how to expand that network. We hope by the end of the evening that you will have had a chance to think about your support system like you never have before, and we'll have some concrete tools in hand to be able to consider and reconsider your needs and how they're being met over time. Next slide, please, Kelsey. So it's always a little awkward to do introductions to us, but before we really kick things off, we wanted you to just have a few minutes to get to know us as your presenters for the evening. So Kelsey Hampstead is a licensed independent clinical social worker who obtained her master's in social work from Brigham Young University in April of 2018. During her graduate studies, Kelsey interned in pediatric oncology at Primary Children's Hospital in Salt Lake City, Utah. And following her completion of studies, Kelsey pursued a postmaster's fellowship in pediatric psychosocial oncology with us at the Dana-Farber Boston Children's Cancer and Blood Disorders Center. And at that time, she was assigned to work with patients being treated for both hematologic malignancies and solid tumors. Following the completion of her fellowship, we were lucky enough to hire Kelsey as one of our full-time outpatient psychosocial clinicians, and she now works exclusively with our solid tumor patients. In addition to her clinical work with families, Kelsey works alongside me to co-direct our Parents Together program at Dana-Farber, and she also participates on the Pediatric Psychosocial Training Committee at Dana-Farber. It is always a little strange to introduce myself, but here goes. So I am also a licensed independent clinical social worker and obtained my master's in social work from Boston University. As part of my graduate program, I completed an advanced practicum in pediatric psychosocial oncology at Dana-Farber. And after obtaining my degree, I also completed a postmaster's fellowship where my work focused exclusively on patients receiving bone marrow and stem cell transplants. Following completion of my fellowship, I worked in adult oncology at Dana-Farber as an outpatient clinician for 6 years. And in September of 2017, I had the great pleasure to return to my love of pediatric oncology, where I now work with the patients being treated for hematologic malignancies. And in addition to my clinical work with families, I have the pleasure of co-directing Dana-Farber's Parents Together program alongside Kelsey. I also serve as the director of the sibling program at Dana-Farber. So that's a little bit about us. And with that, we're going to turn to our topic for the evening, which is social support. So tonight's presentation has 4 main objectives that we hope we will cover in the course of the presentation, and you can let us know how good of a job we're doing. So first, we want to talk through the process of identifying who is actually in your social support system. And a hint here is to think broad and be open to being surprised. Second, we're going to talk about the different types of support that you might need. So we also think carefully about the types of support that your friends and family, those social connections, are best equipped to provide at the current time. And third, we will consider how best to manage the social support network that you already have to ensure your support needs are met. As a part of this process, we will also be thinking about how you might expand your network to beyond the people that you have around you now. And finally, we will address an area that so many of the patients that we work with every day struggle with, namely how to recognize opportunities and take them to say yes to offers of support. So when I first started planning for the presentation tonight, I mentioned earlier why we chose this topic, because it's truly something that we work through with our patients every single day. It goes without saying that humans are innately social creatures, and the concept of social support, especially in times of stress or challenge, is critical for our survival. In addition, when we're in a situation where our social support needs are met or are not being met, this only increases the stress that we feel. Social support is something that we not only appreciate and benefit from when it's present, but also something that we suffer from the absence of. In exploring more about social support for this talk, we came across these 2 quotes that capture the importance of social support beautifully. The first says, support. It's not just a word, but a feeling. Without support, nothing and no one can stand on ground and achieve all the hurdles. A chair has support of its legs to stay still, to bear our weight. Similarly, if we have support from even one person, the doors of our darkness would be wide open for growth. And from Helen Keller, alone, we can do so little. Together, we can do so much. When I first read these, they brought to mind a few very important points about social support. First, how essential it is. And second, the benefits that it brings to allow us to bear the weight of life and achieve the hurdles in front of us. And third, the value that even one support person adds to our lives. As we move through tonight's talk, we will see that some have a large and robust social support system, and others may have fewer people in their social support network. And Kelsey and I will repeatedly argue that it's not the size that matters, but the quality of the connection, and specifically, how well the people in your support network are equipped to support your particular needs.
All right, I'm going to jump in here now. So social support is something we all require as a basic human need. This includes friendship and close, intimate relationships. The collective challenge that we all face is figuring out how to obtain this needed support. We know we need it, but how do we get it? Each person has different and unique social support needs based on personality and life circumstances. That also applies to each of you who have tuned in today. We all have different social support needs, so it is important to focus on yourself as an individual and not compare yourself to others. Take a moment and ask yourself, how are you currently obtaining the social support you need? And is it working for you? I love how the quote on this slide emphasizes the universal need for all people to have social support in order to thrive. Everyone needs a support system, be it family, friends, coworkers, therapists, or religious leaders. We cannot do life alone and expect to keep mentally, emotionally, and spiritually healthy. Everyone needs some sort of support system on which to rely. Being in the position of providing care for pediatric cancer patients definitely adds a level of complexity in trying to obtain this much needed support. At times, it can be surprising when someone steps up to support you, and in other instances, it can feel incredibly disappointing when others seem to let you down. On the next few slides, I'll be sharing a few real-life examples of parents and caregivers that Larissa and I have worked with in the Jimmy Fund Clinic at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. The names and some other identifying information have been changed to protect the privacy of these families. We hope that sharing these real-life experiences of both the good and the bad of social support can help to normalize and bring light to the complexity involved in finding support while caring for a pediatric cancer patient. Throughout our presentation, we will refer to a number of parents and caregivers as well to help illustrate these concepts. So we will start off with Erin. Erin is the young mother of her first and only child, Jay. After a long and complicated workup, Jay was diagnosed with rhabdomyosarcoma at the age of 6 months. Erin moved to Boston with her husband and in-laws to obtain care for Jay. Erin soon became overburdened by the emotional support needs of the other family members. When Erin and her husband enlisted the grandparents' help with moving to Boston for Jay's care, they were hopeful that the arrangement would provide them with additional support, as they were uprooting their life to seek treatment in another state. However, as the months of treatment rolled on, Erin found herself not only in the position of being Jay's primary caregiver, but she was also taking on the role of providing emotional support to his worried grandparents. Erin could understand that the family members all meant well, but instead of receiving emotional support for herself after attending long clinic appointments with Jay, she found herself having to console all the other family members. Erin did not have the opportunity to receive emotional support from her family members in the home, and this left her feeling completely overwhelmed. Maybe some of you on this call can relate to Erin's experience. Have you ever felt disappointed in your expectations of support? Now going on to our next case, Alyssa. Alyssa is in her mid-30s and the mother of 4-year-old Eva and another 2-year-old child. Alyssa is married to a supportive partner, but they live far from their extended family and have minimal social connections given the isolation of COVID these past few years. Eva is currently being treated for B-cell ALL with an anticipated 2 years of treatment. Alyssa and her family find themselves quite socially isolated given their distance to family and living in a rural area. Prior to her daughter Eva's diagnosis, Alyssa worked at a local dance studio where her children were enrolled in classes. When Eva was diagnosed, Alyssa took a leave from work, but continued to take Eva's sister to her dance lessons. At one point during a dance class drop-off, Eva became upset that she was unable to attend her own class. Alyssa's coworkers witnessed the steroid-induced raging meltdown and wanted to do something to help. Alyssa was pleasantly surprised when her coworkers presented her with the idea of one of the staff members picking up the sibling from the car, thus avoiding Eva and her mother having to come into the dance studio for drop-off. Alyssa's coworkers might not have immediately come to mind as people she could turn to within her network of support. Perhaps some of you can relate to Alyssa's experience and have had the opportunity to see how others have unexpectedly found ways to support you. In both the cases of Erin and Alyssa, these parents felt limited by the supports available to them. One found herself disappointed and the other pleasantly surprised. When thinking about social support, it can be helpful to break it down and actually create a list of the people who you interact with. We encourage each of you to do this exercise regularly and to remember it's not about the number of people on your list, as we will repeat over and over again. Some people have an easy time thinking of many individuals in their social network, and some may have fewer. This doesn't mean, again, that one social network is better than another. It's all about how well your needs are being met by the people in your network and thinking about if both your emotional and task needs are being met. There will be more on this to come. Here's an example of a worksheet we will be sending out to you all that you can fill out with the names of individuals in your network and their relationship to you. We have filled this one in with a few names for examples. One of the benefits of filling out a form like this is to help prevent missing the unexpected people who you can lean on and provide them an opportunity to step up. It can also be challenging in the moment when you are in need of support to think of who to ask. So having a completed list can be a very helpful reference. A good point of reference here is to list anyone that you are in contact with at least once a week. You may also, as noted in the instructions, want to include people with whom you connect with less frequently, but still think of as being close to you. Now, going back to Erin and Alyssa, neither of their situations magically changed. However, with an expanded perspective on who they could turn to for social support, they were able to find surprising ways to help meet their needs. The dynamic with Erin's in-laws remains the same, but she has started making supportive connections with other parents in the Jimmy Fund Clinic. And she is receiving increased support from her psychosocial clinician and larger care team after sharing some of her support challenges with them. Similarly, Alyssa has found ways to let others step up and support her. Perhaps prior to the incident at the dance studio, she would not have expected to find support from her coworkers.
Thanks, Kelsey. So Kelsey did a beautiful job walking us through the process of thinking broadly about everyone in our social support network. And it brings us to thinking about what type of supporter each of these people are, or what they're most skilled or available to provide at the current moment. It can't be overstated that people absolutely change over time due to many factors. And the picture we come up with now, and the list we come up with now, about the types of support we can expect from each person on our social network list is not stagnant. It's rather just a snapshot in time and something worth revisiting from time to time, especially when we begin to feel unsupported or frustrated with the type of support that's available to us. And this is a spot where I usually talk about myself as an example. So we can see here the division between task and emotional supporters. And these are typically the two camps that people can fall into when we think about what types of support people provide for us. And I think for myself, and thinking about illustrating changing over time, before having children of my own and all of the many time struggles that happen with that transition, which I know everyone on this call can relate to in one way or another, I, being a social worker, was really good at the emotional support piece. And I also had the time to do the task support pieces and knew the value. And I was somebody who could do both. And over time, now having children of my own, sometimes I can do both, but more often than not, I have shifted in this phase of my life to being probably somebody who on most people's lists would show up as an emotional supporter. So that illustrates that kind of shift and change in time for people of just where their lives are and what may be happening, now or at the current time or in the future for them that may shift or change what they are good at or available for. So as said, the people in our social network list can typically be divided into these two groups, task supporters and emotional supporters. And task supporters we can see are those who take on the concrete tasks, things like transportation, meal deliveries, walking the dog, bringing in the mail. And emotional supporters tend to be the ones that can lend an ear, can tolerate hearing the information that you want to share about your child's diagnosis and treatment or other stressors that are happening in your life. Now, in addition to these two main categories, however, there are people, like I described myself early on in my life, pre-children, that have the ability to do both and do both well. Now, I personally refer to these people as the unicorns of our support network list, but they really do exist. And when we find them, they can be tremendously helpful due to their ability to provide support for both types of needs that arise. It's also possible that some people that you've listed on your social network list are currently capable of providing neither type of support due to their own circumstances or support capability. While we rarely examine our social support networks this way, breaking people down into these categories, when we're under stress with higher levels of task support and emotional support needs, having a sense of who's good at or who's available to provide certain types of support is critical to ensuring that our needs are met and to understanding why we run into barriers sometimes. Often, we might be asking people in our network to provide support that they're not well equipped to provide, at least at that current time. Next slide, please, Kels. Thank you. So on this slide, you're going to see our previous social network list that Kelsey showed us with all those people listed. But now, next to each person is the type of support that they're currently providing and a letter in red. An E stands for someone who's providing emotional support. So for example, Rebecca, the best friend who's in regular contact by phone and email. We can assume that she's somebody who can tolerate hearing the ups and downs of any given day. A T stands for those who are providing task-based support needs. So that would be Amy, who's helping out with work projects, Thomas, who's helping to gather the mail, the neighbor who's helping to gather the mail. Those are both great examples. A B stands for that rare unicorn, that's someone who's available to provide both task and emotional support. So in this instance, Jennifer is a great example here as she's providing transportation for the other children in the family and also creating a space for adult conversation and sharing and connection. And finally, Christina is a good example of someone who's on the network list, but not currently providing either type of support, not because she's bad at it, not because she's incapable of it, but because at this point in her life, being a new mom, adjusting to the birth of a new baby, she's not in a space where she can do that. And this again illustrates that we may look at this list or redo this for those of you who have a child who's in treatment for a number of years or many months. Some of the people that we capture today doing this activity might be really different than the people that we capture 6 months from now, a year from now, and how we think about the support that they provide and what they're capable of. Next slide, please, Kelsey. So Monica. So I get the joy of bringing another case example in. So Monica is the mother to her 4-year-old daughter, Anna. Anna is being treated for a Wilms tumor. Monica is married to a supportive partner who has a demanding job, making it nearly impossible to take off work for appointments, given he carries the family's medical insurance. And I'm sure this sounds familiar to many people on the call. So Monica's situation is that her best friend, Brooke, has stepped up and driven Monica and Anna to appointments and joined visits to help provide support. She's also helped with transportation to and from school for Anna's siblings on non-clinic days. So in this case example, Brooke is someone who would be listed on Monica's social network list for sure, and she would have a B, that rare unicorn, next to her name, indicating she's providing both types of support. She's tackling some of the task-related support needs that Monica's experiencing around transportation to and from clinic for herself and Anna, as well as transportation for Anna's siblings to and from school. Brooke is also, however, showing up in the clinic and showing herself as available for emotional support for Monica by demonstrating her ability to sit in a clinic visit, hear the information, and be next to Monica as she's navigating the ups and downs of her child's treatment. So that's just an example of real life example of the both category, which brings us to Heather. So the next case of Heather is the mother of Rachel, a young baby who was diagnosed in utero with neuroblastoma. Rachel had a complicated workup involving weeks of surveillance monitoring prior to starting chemotherapy treatment. Heather and her family were all understandably concerned for Rachel during this time, but unfortunately, this concern turned into additional emotional burden for Heather. Not only was Heather managing her own struggles with postpartum anxiety after delivery, but also the added uncertainties of disease management for Rachel and the emotional needs of extended family. Heather found support through connecting with a therapist to help address her mental health and through her psychosocial clinician for support through Rachel's treatment and coaching around boundary setting with her family. So Heather's case highlights the need to both consider adding new supports to your network, as well as the potential need to set boundaries with your typical supporters. In Heather's situation, maternal grandparents, who are typically a tremendous source of support for the family, were unable to play this role effectively given their own emotional reactions to Rachel's diagnosis and treatment. Heather had to make the choice, knowing these supports were not accessible in the current moment, to seek out additional new supports for her social network list in the form of mental health professionals. As clinical social workers ourselves, who regularly play the emotional support role to countless families, Kelsey and I would be remiss not to mention and highlight the value of having an emotional support person who is a mental health clinician and not emotionally involved in the situation. There's something really unique about that relationship that provides an emotional space for families, but without the burden of having to hold that person's emotional reaction to the situation as well. So clinicians are often very capable of holding that emotional content. And in this example, it should be noted that the maternal grandparents were not cut off from contact with the family, but rather Heather found it was less taxing on her to know that she could not rely on them as the emotional supporters that they typically are. She needed to seek this support from another source. And then finally, our final example. So highlighting the importance of examining the types of support available to us through our social network is that of Avery. So Avery is the mother to her 18-year-old son, Riley. Riley's being treated for leukemia. Avery is married to Riley's stepfather and has several teen and young adult children and stepchildren living both in and outside the home. And the family moved to Boston from the Pacific Northwest to pursue care, leaving behind an extensive network of friends and family. At the time of Riley's diagnosis, several close friends were dealing with recent losses in their own lives, as well as ongoing struggles with substance abuse. So in this example, because of the family's move across the country for treatment, Avery lacked family and friends locally to lean on, and this can often be a struggle, particularly around finding help for task-related support. In addition, in Avery's network, the fact that so many people were struggling with their own losses and life circumstances left them unavailable to emotionally support Avery at that moment. This would be an example where several individuals may show up on Avery's social network list if I were to ask her to do this exercise, but they would have an N next to their name, indicating that they're not currently providing either type of support. Ultimately, this is another case where an existing social network needed to be added to ensure that support needs were being met. Avery identified emotional support, specifically having someone who could tolerate hearing about her son's treatment and the daily challenges as particularly important to her. She found this through participating in a pediatric cancer support community, just like the one that all of you belong to through Momcology. These support communities can and should be on the social network list that many of you create.
Now, building off of the various roles that different individuals in your social network may take, another aspect to consider is how close you feel your relationship is with each individual. Some people may be your trusted confidants, while others are just acquaintances. You may also think of this step as determining who is in your inner and outer circle to varying degrees. I would also like to highlight the last bullet point on this slide, that it's okay to have different boundaries with different people. Perhaps in some cases, you do feel supported in sharing treatment updates with a particular friend. And with others, you feel those conversations end up being more about managing your friend's worries. The important thing is to do whatever is best and feels most supportive to you. If you are a visual person, you may find writing names down on a closeness circle to be a helpful exercise. From the example on the slide, you put yourself at the center and move outwards by closeness of relationship. So moving outward from the inner circle to the next ring in this example, you can see the name of the individual's partner, Sam. Their best friend, Rebecca, is labeled in the next ring. Their coworker, Amy, is in the next, and their neighbor, Thomas, was put in the last ring. As mentioned before, at different times throughout your life, people may jump rings in the circle, sometimes being closer or more distant due to life circumstances. This is very normal and is another reason to consider evaluating your closeness circle periodically, especially in times when you may need to increase your social support. To demonstrate this, I will share another case on the next slide. Lydia is a single mother in her early 40s. She is the primary caregiver of her only child, Luke, her 12-year-old son, who is diagnosed with metastatic osteosarcoma. Lydia describes herself as being fiercely independent from a very young age, since the time of her parents' divorce. Lydia has been happily surprised by a change in closeness with her mother. The shock of her son's diagnosis and the extent of the treatment ahead left Lydia feeling desperate for support. For many years, Lydia and her mother had been distant. If thinking back to the circle diagram on the previous slide, her mother probably would have been in the last ring. However, Lydia was pleasantly surprised when her mother offered to drive and attend appointments with her and Luke. She would listen without judgment or offering advice, and overall stepped up as being the support person she really needed. Lydia shared that she feels closer to her mother now than she has in many, many years. In considering the people closest to you, it is helpful to maintain a flexibility mindset and to consider that circumstances are constantly moving and changing. If you fill out your closeness circle today, that will be a snapshot of today, and there may be changes over time. A common challenge to consider for when you're looking for social support is trying to find the right type of support. As Larissa mentioned earlier, there's emotional versus task support and a variety of other things that you individually might be looking for in your circumstances. And I'm sure each of you can recall a time where you walked away from an experience and felt sorry you asked for support, perhaps because it was either unhelpful or it made you feel uncomfortable. These experiences of mismatch or negative support encounters can sometimes make us feel like we wish that we had never asked for support or accepted in the first place. However, when we know who to ask and for what types of support to ask them for, we can avoid these unhelpful and often very unpleasant interactions. I want to direct your attention to the quote on this slide. It's okay to be a shoulder, cheerleader, friend, and support system, but remember, you deserve as good as you give. From our work with parents and caregivers, we hear a myriad of reasons why sometimes an offer of support is declined. Such examples include feeling uncomfortable accepting what feels like a handout from somebody, and feeling uncomfortable receiving care from others when they themselves are always the caregiver. Others have expressed that they do not ask for support because they do not have the time or the energy to even ask, or they do not have a system for doing so. And some just, under any circumstance, feel uncomfortable even asking or accepting support from others. On the next few slides, I will highlight 3 cases in which caregivers encounter different support scenarios. We will share a negative interaction, a mismatch, and a positive interaction to help demonstrate the different experiences parents have with support. We will start off with our example of a negative support scenario that left Carrie feeling sorry she had asked for support. Carrie is a 40-year-old mother of 5 children, with the youngest being on treatment for leukemia. Carrie stays at home to care for the children as her primary role in the family, and she is not at all used to asking for support or feeling entitled to it. Carrie and her family live far from clinic, and they have an expansive social network, but everyone is busy with their own families, with work, etc. An allergic reaction to chemotherapy now requires her young child to come to clinic 3 times per week for 30 weeks, making it impossible for her to balance the needs of her other children. So given the demanding treatment schedule, as well as the many needs of her other 4 children at home, Carrie asked her partner for more help at home with the other 4 children to allow her to be present and available for their young child undergoing intensive cancer treatment. Not being used to asking for support, Carrie worked up the nerve to ask her partner for this additional support with the other children. And unfortunately, her partner did not take on any additional responsibilities, and ultimately, no change occurred. This then left Carrie feeling sorry she had asked and caused her to have to find alternative care arrangements for the children. Corinne's example demonstrates a mismatch support scenario. Corinne is the mother of 2-year-old Emma, a pediatric cancer patient diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma. Emma has a 5-year-old brother with low-functioning autism. Corinne is a hardworking single mother, and she has a large social network of friends and family, all of whom have been checking in for emotional support. Corinne is now in an uncomfortable position of not currently feeling the need for emotional support, but actually requiring help with tasks such as cleaning the house, watching her other child, and providing meals. Corinne described the discomfort and feeling ungrateful for the support she is receiving, when really what she is needing now is task support. These types of mismatches can lead to frustration, and again, feeling unsatisfied with the support you are receiving. Clearly communicating your support needs, task versus emotional, or otherwise, can help to avoid these frustrating mismatch scenarios. Lastly, as an example of a positive support interaction, I'll return back to the case of Lydia. As a reminder, because I know we've talked about a lot of cases tonight, Lydia is a single mother in her early 40s who has always been fiercely independent and now is caring for her son who is diagnosed with metastatic osteosarcoma. At one point during a particularly challenging round of chemo, Luke's mother needed to unexpectedly get him to clinic to be seen by his doctors. Lydia's car was in the shop, and so she desperately called around to ask for a ride to the clinic. Lydia ultimately reached out to her mother, who readily accepted the request. Lydia was immediately relieved, and her mother was glad she was able to provide some assistance. Since that time, Lydia has learned that she can rely on her mother for task support, and the interaction has strengthened their relationship overall. Another consideration when trying to access social support is being aware of what you actually need. It's not uncommon for parents and caregivers to turn down support or not to ask for needed support because they are unsure of what they need in that moment. Preparing a list of both task and emotional support ideas can help you be prepared to accept or ask for support. On this slide, you will see some examples of the different types of supports, the task and emotional, and ideas of what you can consider asking for. We will be sending this list to you along with the other worksheets. But just to list off a couple of the examples on here, shopping for groceries is an example of task support, as well as maybe taking out the trash, cleaning the house. I particularly like cooking, baking. For emotional support, having somebody who's a good listener or a shoulder to cry on, or somebody to even just go to a movie with. All these things can help.
So as we transition to this next slide, The graphic we've included here may remind you of that closeness circle that Kelsey guided us through a few slides earlier. So the ring theory was discussed in an article in the Los Angeles Times back in 2013. And it, in fact, asks us in times of challenge to think about our social connections as occupying various circles, just like we did in that closeness diagram. For this purpose, the center of the circle is the person most affected by the crisis. In the case of your child's diagnosis, this would be your child. The next circle would include immediate household members like yourself, your partner or co-parent, and any siblings. The circle beyond that might include grandparents, aunts and uncles, and very close friends, and so on as we move out further from your child. Essentially, as we move further out, the individuals in any given circle are just a little bit less connected to your child at the center. So the rules of the ring theory are as follows. The person at the center of the ring can say anything she wants to anyone at any time. She can complain, seek support, whatever she needs. It is, as the article says, the one payoff for being in the center of the ring. When you're talking to a person in a smaller ring than your own, the goal should always be to help or to comfort. When you yourself need to cry or yell or talk about how the situation reminds you of something else in your own life, you should do this to individuals in rings larger than your own, further away, right? In other words, comfort in, dump out. When we are left feeling frustrated or overwhelmed by interactions with those in our own networks, as we learned from Kelsey, sometimes this is because they're not equipped to provide the specific needs, and it leads to that feeling of negative support. Another reason for these interactions having a rather icky feel is when those that we're seeking support from are breaking the rules of the ring theory and dumping their own feelings in towards those more intimately connected to the crisis at hand. In the case of Heather earlier, as her daughter Rachel was diagnosed, Rachel's maternal grandparents were unable to stop themselves from sharing their own emotional struggles, leading to Heather feeling overwhelmed by the need to support additional people, and generally feeling her support needs were not being met. Heather's parents, in effect, broke the rules of the ring theory, comfort in and dumping out. In my clinical work with families, I often provide the article that goes with this image and encourage families to share it with their friends and family who are curious about how best to support them. You will be provided with your own copy of this handout at the close of tonight's presentation, and I encourage you to share it widely with those around you, because I think it is a theory that when we hear it talked about, like tonight, you probably are listening to it and thinking, that makes total sense. But we are all so guilty of certain moments, right, in our lives where somebody's really struggling in the middle of it. And to make connection, we have a tendency to say, oh, I remember when I had something like that happen and it felt like this to me. And what we've done in that moment is dumped our own experience in rather than just being able to listen to that person's experience. It's an amazing, right, skill to learn how to do this, to share at minimum with people who are at least in the same ring as yourself. So thinking about just sharing this with the people around you as a way of understanding and learning how best to support people who are going through a challenging time. And as we think about how best to manage the support system we have, Kelsey, I'll have you go to the next slide. A few moments at least have to be devoted to talking about communications. And it goes without saying that an entire presentation could be devoted to this topic. I sort of think about communication. It's not an accident that I picked this image for the slide, because this level of trying to untangle a very complicated web of strings feels a lot like the task of trying to describe communication and give you a strategy in one slide. So I'm going to do my best with this. But we wanted to leave you with just one strategy to think about how to communicate your needs in a way that can be effective, especially when it comes to sharing what you need in terms of task or emotional support. So speaking in code is a strategy that would benefit all of us to practice more often. Code, as you can see from the slide, is an acronym that means our communication has clarity. In other words, that it's specific in terms of what we're asking for, when we need it, and how it needs to look. Speaking in code also means that our communication takes the form of I statements such as I would like, or I need, or I would appreciate. In other words, owning the message as your own needs. And messages spoken in code are also directed to the person for whom your message is intended. Games of telephone rarely lead to accurate and effective communication. We've all played that game as a child. We all know what happens. So it's incredibly important that we deliver our messages to the right audience. And finally, speaking in code requires us to evaluate or ask for feedback. When we communicate a need for support, this might entail us asking or finishing the request with, does that make sense? Or does that feel like something you could do? As one example, as a mother in need of transportation for herself and her child to clinic, our prior case example, Monica, might call her best friend Brooke to say, in quotes, Anna has an appointment at the clinic on Monday, and I'm having trouble finding a ride. We need to be there at noon, so we would need to leave the house at 10:30. We might not get home until 4:30 that afternoon. I could also really use the extra hands to occupy Anna during infusion. Are you available to go with us? Does that time frame work for your schedule? In communicating this way, Heather's speaking in code, ensuring she's more likely to have her needs met by someone who understands the ask, and ensuring she gets the feedback needed to know that this task can be taken off her plate. So, final slide. We have covered a lot of information tonight, and we want to leave you with the handouts following tonight's presentation so that you have some actual concrete tools to take forward with you. But as we're thinking about managing a social network, we couldn't close the presentation without mentioning a few resources that can be really helpful in organizing the supporters that you have around you. So Caring Bridge is a website many of you may be familiar with that allows for both space to blog and thereby process your child's treatment path and share it with those around you, some of those emotional supporters who may want to hear the details. And having this platform has been tremendously helpful for many families surrounded by emotional supporters who want to hear the story, but without having to individually share every detail multiple times with tons of people, which can be terribly overwhelming and at worst, traumatic to have to continue to reshare and reshare. Caring Bridge also has a wonderful calendar function to keep task-related supporters organized around things like transportation needs, meal deliveries, etc. No one benefits from having all the casseroles dropped off on the same day, right? I mean, that's something that I think you've all been through. Lots of Helping Hands also has a wonderful calendar function to organize those that want to help in a concrete way. And finally, Neighbor Brigade is a resource that's available in many communities to organize those interested in providing task-related support to anyone in the community in need. For those looking to expand their network, Neighbor Brigade might be worth exploring as an option to connect to others in your community who have a documented desire to help other people and be connected in that way. So with that, we have come to the close of the content that we had to deliver to you. We thank you so much for being here with us and opening yourself up to thinking more critically about your own support network and your needs for support. And we do hope that you're leaving tonight with some tools or food for thought as you consider managing your existing network and possibly expanding to others around you. And now for the remainder of our time together, we would love to open it up for questions and comments.
I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing screen. All right.
I want to say, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much. You have absolutely given us lots of food for thought, lots to think about, and some really practical ways to think about those things. So, thank you so much, Kelsey and Larissa, for taking the time tonight to be with us. I hope that you're seeing, all the accolades coming in and the thanks and the hearts. And we have some really great questions that that Kat and I would love to talk through with you. Your points tonight clearly what resonated with a lot of our moms, and I haven't checked the attendee list. Maybe we have some dads here. I'm sorry, dads, if I'm leaving you out, but you have definitely hit home with what you've shared with us tonight. So thank you very much.
That was great. I'm going to echo what Layla said. For those that don't know Layla is our Momcology program manager. She works very, very closely with Kelsey and Larissa on our Connections program at Dana-Farber. So, and she also hosts all of these caregiver lounges. So there's some great questions in the chat box.
I'm super eager to hear all of your answers to all of them.
Yes. There's one that I just wanted to ask because it's ringing very true, very, very close to home for me also. So I'll start it off with this one. How do you reach out for support years after treatment has finished and your child moves into survivorship and they're being seen at survivorship clinic, but the support has dwindled because you did it and it's over, right? That's what everybody outside of our world thinks, but we inside the world know that that's not the case. Though in most cases that the hospital support and the clinic that has that built-in support system, that also isn't as frequent of a available resource for us. So what's your advice in that situation?
I'm happy to take a first stab at it, Larissa.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I think that is such a relatable question to ask, and I think it's a great way to kick off the discussion. We actually, in our connections group, have quite a few parents who are their children is a survivor, and they have been off treatment for a number of years, who have joined and have found a lot of great support. So though I do acknowledge that some of the resources change with availability once you transition off treatment, there are still some groups, including our connections group and probably others as well, that are still available. So part of my role, and Larissa's too, is to help families as they transition off treatment, to help find them community-based resources. So maybe at this point, finding a therapist in the community who can be with you more long-term is a better solution than maybe just checking in with a psychosocial clinician when you're at the hospital once a year or spaced out even further. That might not be as helpful or meet the need quite as much. And perhaps a family is going to a hospital that doesn't have as much psychosocial support available. Doctors, if you speak with the oncologist and just let them know of the support struggle that you're having right now, they also are familiar or at least have other clinicians who they can reach out to help with locating the support. There are a lot of programs out there, and I just hope that families will continue to voice these concerns, even off treatment. Let's normalize that. Also, when doctors and others hear these needs, that's what gets us the ability to create more programs. So continue voicing these things so we can make more things available to families. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, Larissa, to that too.
Yeah, no, I would just add that I think, it's been interesting to Kelsey and I, and now running our connections program at Dana-Farber for a little over 2 years, to see the number of people who come at minimum very far into treatment. I think when we started the connections program, we anticipated that we would serve more families who were newer in their diagnosis. And I think it really speaks to, the fact that, as Kat has indicated, you've experienced this, Sarah, who's asked the question, certainly you've experienced this as well. You're not unique in that experience, because it certainly seems that people are looking for that that support as they get further in the process. And my suspicion, having worked with a lot of families in these situations, is that that is exactly because the support does dwindle off from the support network. I would say, circling back to kind of the end of the presentation and thinking about speaking in code and some of the, communication strategies that can be really important, is never in our lives. And, pediatric cancer doesn't change this, but we have this, desire often in life to think that people are really good mind readers and know exactly what we need and are actively choosing not to provide it. And the reality is, the older I get, the more I recognize this. People really are not thinking about you nearly as much as you think that they're thinking about you. So if you are not communicating what you need, people have no idea, right? This is such an important skill and strategy to practice, is being able to speak really clearly to what we need and be open to the fact that, right, maybe the person says, I can't do that right now. Okay, right? Like, you have an answer to that and you go to the next person on your list. So it's kind of opening yourself up to that. Like, it's sort of like that fear of rejection that can come up in so many other areas.
Mhm.
It happens, but nothing horrible happens to you when somebody says, no, like, I can't do that right now, or this week really isn't a good time for me to do that. It's sort of steeling yourself to know that, like, that will happen. And you have the potential of finding somebody who can really meet your needs. But if you don't speak up about them, they don't know that they exist.
I would add one other little thing, just because this is something that I do get so much, is that I think there is that little piece of us that feels bad continuing to seek support from our friends and family or from hospital resources when we feel like the thing that those people are saying, that we're on the other side of it, when we want that to be the truth. And the reality is, it's not the truth. But we don't necessarily, we feel guilt for asking for that help. So I think that what we as fellow parents and caregivers can do is encourage each other, remind each other that it's normal, and normalize it, so that the people that are coming up and doing this 10 years from now, they're going to have an easier time because the doctors have heard it, the social workers have heard it, people in the community have heard it. And, let's be brave enough to ask for the help that we need. And in the meantime, we're all here.
Mhm.
I think yeah, that's super helpful, and just asking, and Larissa, I appreciate your acknowledging that we need to recognize that there are just going to be no's, right? We do have to just put ourselves out there, and it sometimes can be a hard thing because folks outside this world don't get that it's still a struggle, that we're still in it, right? That it's not over. And I do find, Pat said, was just talking with other moms, right? And each other, and we get it. And I think that ties really well into a question that I feel is very relatable that's come up, but like, we get to a point, right, where one of the things, most of our friends, some of us now, are other cancer moms, because that's the population who understands, right? And how do we, there is something that's in your presentation that's coming to mind, but I'm gonna ask and see if you come up with the same thing, right? How do we address that, or think about or process that feeling of feeling guilty about leaning so heavily on other moms who we know also, we reach out to them because they get it, but we also know that they are going through a lot and stressed and struggling too. How can we
Can I take
balance
a
that?
stab at this
Not,
first, Kelsey?
not guilty feeling with they're the
I'm
only ones who get it.
happy to jump into this one. So I think it comes up frequently for me in thinking about, often the people who can understand your path the best are the people who are either walking it or have recently walked it. And there's either the worry, right, for people who are actively walking it, is it putting too much on their plate when they have so much? And for people who have walked the path and are no longer actively walking it, does it bring up trauma for them, right? To hear your experience, to hear, what you're going through, does it bring up different worries? Does it make them stressed out about it? And what I will think and say is, I think the value of mutual support is that it's mutual support. Right? So the ability to know that you may be in need of support on certain days or at certain minutes of the day, and you are also capable of providing support to others, regardless of how hard the scenario is that you're in, is an incredibly powerful feeling. To feel that you are not so beaten down by your situation that you are not capable of supporting another human being. Right. So I often think about those opportunities of leaning on someone who's in a difficult time as an opportunity to let them feel a bit of strength in the ability to support someone else, regardless of what's happening in their lives. So I think that's one spin of how I think about it. And I think it can always be phrased in, and you guys know how to do this best, given you're in this space, right? Always phrased with the possibility of, today may not be an easy day to hear about this. Is it okay if I talk about this today? Is it okay if I share with you about the appointment today? And allowing the person to have the ability to say, actually, like, this week is hard, but could we get a cup of coffee next week? Or, could I get some sleep tonight and talk to you in the morning? Giving somebody the space to be able to say, I don't know if now is the right time, but also recognizing you've all been in the space, I'm certain, of like that feeling of like, oh, I still got it. Like I can still support somebody else, even though I've been in this situation. And that's a really powerful position to be in. I don't know if you have other thoughts on that, Kelsey.
Yeah, I think just I completely agree with everything that you're saying. And I also would just add, thinking back to creating a list of those people who you rely on. Think about your close friends who have been through this and have their names on that list. And maybe one week, Sarah can be your support person and she has an E by her name. But then the next week, maybe she can't do anything because it's fluctuating based on what's going on in her life. So I think, like you said, and like we mentioned earlier, kind of having that flexibility mindset to know that at some points you are going to be requiring more support. And at other times you might be giving more support. It's kind of the ebb and flow and just kind of giving it some space to be. And knowing sometimes somebody, like Larissa said, and like was said before, sometimes the answer might be no, I can't do it today. But giving space for that and knowing that there are other people on your list that you can turn to. So I think that's the perspective that I would offer.
That's great.
I think you're right, Larissa, so powerful, right? And I think about when we want to give something back or share an experience with someone who's asking. I know in my mind, I think not that we redeem all the horrible things that seem to happen, but if we had to go through this, like, let's at least take advantage of the opportunity for it to maybe be useful or helpful or supportive to somebody else, right? Like maybe this tiny little sliver of something good can come out of it if it means that we can share something helpful or supportive with somebody else.
We have a couple questions that go together, a little hand in hand here. So one being, how do you process it when someone close to you isn't able to step up in the way that you thought they might? And, not wanting to feel resentment, but feeling resentment, right? And then I think this one goes right along with it. How do you suggest communicating to somebody that those that need it, the circle of support, where you find yourself, you're serving, you're comforting the people that are in the outer rings? And how do you suggest communicating that to them? So I kind of think those go hand in hand. So people who aren't stepping up the way you want or the way that you need, and also those who are dumping in.
So the people who are dumping in, this might be the social worker in me. So like, pardon me if I'm going to social work everybody right now, but
I'll take it. Please do.
It's a hazard of the gig, So I think for me, I think a little bit about, when someone has that, that tendency to kind of dump in, I find myself thinking about what needs for them are not being met, like what is causing them to dump in. And I might use that frame to think about, having them think about what supports they have for this situation while politely indicating that you are not the appropriate support for them in that instance, if that makes sense. So being able to say, like, I hear that that's hard, right? And I hear that it's hard to see, like, perhaps it's, I just am really struggling seeing Molly so sick in that bed when I come in. This happens a lot for grandparents. I hear this all the time, at least once a day, right? Grandparents come in, they cannot tolerate seeing the child in the bed so sick, and they're telling the parents who are needing to be at bedside. So hearing how hard it is to see a child that ill when you need to now stay at bedside 24 hours a day is not helpful. But having grandma be able to have somebody that she can talk to on her drive home from the hospital. Maybe it's her sister, her best friend, somebody where she has the ability to process what she has just witnessed and how difficult it is for her to love and care about this person who's in the center of the circle, and also her child who's closer to, right, the child at the center of the circle. But being able to say, Mom, I hear how hard this is for you. I can't hold this, but I wonder who you might call on your drive home who could, right? Like, who could hold it, who's not as closely connected. So there's almost this kind of education standpoint that comes in while also making sure that that person has the support. It's not your responsibility to find the support for them, but almost putting it out in that space of shining a light on it for them, that they clearly are looking for and need the support. That's why they're jumping in. They're looking to make that connection, right? But you're not the appropriate connection. And it's okay to speak up for yourself in that way too. Does that make sense?
Larissa, I got to tell you, I'm 13 years out and a light bulb just went off in my brain. I had the situation with my mother. I adore her immensely. She's a wonderful person. She was a great help, but always jumping in. And you know what would have been great and really smart in hindsight? I could have sat down and said, Mom, my social worker did this exercise with me. I hear you're struggling. It would be really great. Let's do this exercise together. I haven't done it in a while. And let's see if we can identify some really good supports for you and go through the exercise. What a smart thing to do. Why did I think of that?
Because you were in the middle of the chaos. This is
Right.
why
But that's
people have
such-
social workers.
Right,
Yeah.
but that's a gentle way of identifying. And also those people often might think that they're further in that circle than they really are.
Yes.
Mhm.
There are a lot of people. I always laugh when I see that image, and we can't pop it up quickly, but on the very outside of that image, it says looky loos. It's written in a very like British way, but you get these like onlookers that are like the people who drive by the scene of the crash and are like craning their neck to see what's going on. So you have those people, and oftentimes those people feel like they are much more intimately connected to whatever's happening than they actually are. Right. So they're trying to like dump in, not to dump their stuff, but to make a connection. Right.
Right.
I love that idea of, when your social worker shares a tool with you, share it with family members, right? If it feels like something that could address the stuff that you're watching them struggle with, and by addressing their stuff, they're going to be dumping on you less, share the skills.
Yeah, I'm loving that. I feel like that's a super tangible tool that I wish I had had in my tool belt back in the day. I mean, I have it now, so I will use it now, but my goodness.
It'll come up in other areas of your life.
Oh, believe me.
For
For sure.
When you're struggling.
For sure.
Is there another question you see, Layla?
So again, a lot of ones that are tying together with sort of similar themes. How do we, and you've talked to us a little bit about how we communicate that circle to folks, how we can maybe confront someone who doesn't get that we're in the center of the circle or our child is in the center of the circle. But how do we, when we see those folks that aren't stepping up or that are going the wrong way in the circle, how do we process that resentment? Like when folks are not meeting our expectation, I think it's hard to not feel disappointed and resentful and maybe a little bit bitter, but how do we deal with that? Do you have any tips to not resent them?
Kelsey, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, because I'm actually thinking of a situation going back to a parent who we talked about tonight. Lydia actually is a mother who I work with. And it just so happened right before her son was diagnosed with metastatic osteosarcoma, her best friend went to Hawaii on an extensive time away. And her best friend really was her primary support person. And now she's seeing on social media this fabulous time she's having there. She feels that resentment. And she also feels so conflicted because she loves her friend and she wants her life to go on and she wants her to experience these things. But it's hard. And she wishes her best friend was there with her. Now it has made room for other people in her life to step up, like her mother and other people who maybe she wouldn't have considered or turned to before. But it has taken some time. Some of it is speaking with me about the frustrations and getting some of that emotional piece out. And actually, she ended up speaking with her friend and just naming that this is hard. And her friend received it very well. And I think some of that is because of the closeness of their relationship and the directness, again, referencing back to code communication. But talking with other supportive people, especially like Larissa said, a clinician, a mental health provider who is emotionally removed from the situation to help you process these things can be incredibly helpful. So I can't understate that. I also met with a mother of a newly diagnosed little kiddo earlier this week who let me know that she's been trying to get her son out. They set up a playground in their backyard and they're just having little groups of a mom and another child or two come over. And recently, one of her good friends who has like 3 other kids came and she was just berating her with questions. So worried about, but did you ask the doctors this? Did you talk about this? And really, this mom could recognize that she was incredibly anxious about her own children. And she wasn't asking these questions to be helpful to her, but to get information for herself. And in that moment, I was very impressed by how she handled that. She was able to stay calm and again, just kind of redirect. But also, I just want to emphasize how she ended up setting a boundary and realizing that this is a person who I'm not going to talk to about these things with. And she was a friend who was a little bit further out in that circle. And perhaps she also thought maybe she would be closer in on the rings. But to this mom, she's not. And so setting those boundaries is crucial as well for your sustainability when you're going through these things, finding out who your core people are and how they can help you. And sometimes those things will switch around. But also, if you need to set a boundary, do it.
I think revisiting that circle and the lists that you referenced, which these are going to be going out to all of you, so you'll have access to this. So we'll send an email with the resources. But I think this would have again been helpful going through all of it. The list, reevaluating where people fall as far as what they're capable of helping out with, and just kind of maybe being honest with ourselves about who's capable of, and truly has the ability to do these things, has the capacity to be emotional support or be a task, a task person. I think that's enormously empowering and helpful, and it would probably help relieve a lot of angst, because we might, if we look at that really critically, we probably could more easily identify those that are capable of doing the things that we need. And then reevaluating our circle as people move in and out. Sometimes those people that are in that next circle that you think are going to be there, they don't have the capacity to do it. And they wind up moving outside that circle a little bit. And then maybe eventually they move back in. Maybe they don't. But sometimes the circles and the lists, they shift. And that's okay.
Yeah, they're very fluid. So much of what you talk about brings me right back to, it feels so relatable so early in diagnosis. I know we've been just talking about off treatment and nobody getting it, but so much of this, right, figuring out sometimes very quickly who are the task ones, the ones who can't look you in the eye, but if you mention you need something, 100 of them will be at your door the next day, right? I think I very unintentionally, but maybe, I don't know, deep inside did set a boundary. The night my daughter was diagnosed, we're in the hospital, admitted through the ER, and a neighbor, classmate parent texts me and says, Layla, what should I tell my daughter? Like, Susie's really worried about Julie. How can I reassure her? Which is kind of a wild thing to text somebody within hours of finding out their kid was just diagnosed. And I responded, well, she should be concerned. Like, this is pretty scary. And I did not hear from that mom again. Like, she definitely moved out of the circle, right? And maybe it wasn't the kindest, most compassionate thing, but it was a boundary. And those were not the kind of questions I was ready to be answering in that time. But yeah.
And I
So
think,
I think
Kelsey acknowledged this, but I just want to highlight the piece too of the importance of processing the disappointment with somebody, right? Because I think when there is whatever the emotion is, and some people may term it disappointment. I know I've worked with several people, and I can think of one person in particular in our connections group who has talked a lot about the frustrations and the anger that comes up of watching when you are somebody often who steps up and cares for other people, and now you find yourself in a situation where you need care from someone else and no one's stepping up. And it just, the anger is real. And I think for Kelsey, just hearing, that, this particular mom, Lydia, is, working closely with you, that space of working, again, we kind of made sure, again, social workers can't stop us. We had to put in a case where somebody sought out mental health support as something that was a tremendous support for them. But, right, there's no accident to that, because having somebody who isn't emotionally involved, who is not going to judge you, whatever is said, like there are very firm lines where any judgment or action comes from what you share in a therapeutic space, right? It's very limited stuff that gets anybody really ruffled in those spaces, right? And it becomes a space that's very safe to share honest emotion about what is coming up for you. And I think that I'm so glad someone asked that question, because it is like, it's critical that we process it, right? Just because we're saying don't get stuck in it doesn't mean, right, don't think about it, don't talk about it, don't address it. By all means, process it, because it's real. Like, that emotion is real and deserves a bit of time and attention, but it doesn't help you to get stuck in it.
So piggybacking a little bit on that, we have a question about whether or not it's appropriate, and this probably depends on the case, but I'd love to hear what you have to say. Is it appropriate to approach those disappointments with the people that we maybe are resentful, or is it better to just let them go? And maybe what are some of your tips for both of those options? How can we assess maybe which is best in any given case?
My initial thoughts would be, of course, it's case by case. Perhaps getting some coaching from, again, a mental health clinician to help you think through these things, or another very close, trusted confidant, of how to think about the particular situation you're finding yourself in right now. I would also reflect on, again, the closeness circle. Where does this person lie in your life? Is this somebody who you will continue to rely on, who you depend on? Perhaps it's a family member or somebody like a best friend. And in those scenarios, I would think about, again, using those code communication skills of addressing what's going on, what you're feeling, evaluating whether it's being received correctly as you're speaking to them. But that would be sort of my vague response, because again, I think it would be so case by case. What are your thoughts, Larissa?
I find myself thinking about, I guess what I would ask myself, and whether to chase it down and address it directly or not, is what the value is to me, right? Is the value to educate this person because I really feel that they have the capability to step up and they don't know how. And my providing education could help them to help me, right? And I will tell you, by helping people to help you, you are also helping those people who feel equally helpless around you, do not know how to step into this, And while it's hard to ask for help, 100%, right? I struggle with it as well. When you are struggling and there are people around you who love you and care about you, they want to help. And when they don't know how to do that, it is really painful. And the moments that we can be clear is a gift to them. So for those people, right, that there is, right, like a thought of they could do this, but they don't know how, they might be worth the time and the energy to think about how to pursue this and how to have a conversation about what your experience is, right, and what you need in a clear way. And it's always leaving space that sometimes we think people have this capacity and they just don't, and maybe they let us down, and it is something that we eventually need to let go. And I think there's also some instances where people don't step up or kind of miss the mark, and it's not worth chasing it down, right? And I think we often know in our gut, right, whether we have that, right, that feeling of this is worth a bit of time and energy to see where this could go, or this is really something that, especially in moments of the limited time and energy when you're going through something like pediatric cancer, right, it's not worth the time or energy to chase this down right now. And again, it's processing the sadness around that, of letting, right, the closeness of a relationship kind of dissipate, but also leaving yourself open to the people who will step up that you never would have expected to step up.
Or
I
maybe
hope
never
that
would
it
have
is everyone's experience, and I may be being naive and hoping that, right? But in the midst of so many letdowns and folks that we thought would be there that are not, we had probably just as many surprises of people who seemed to come out of nowhere that were barely on our radar that really have jumped in. And, we're a little over 5 years into this. And some of those folks that appeared seemingly out of nowhere are the ones that are still in it and still here with us. It does make us wonder, and they're not even necessarily close that we can ask, or that they have seemed vulnerable, but it does make us wonder, like, what childhood cancer history do they have? Or if not specific to childhood cancer, like, what's the trauma there that they get it and they don't have to be told that we're still in it?
You
That it's still
mentioned-
nice when you drop a coffee on the porch or run
Layla,
an
you mentioned being still in it, and somebody wrote a question related to that. So that long term, some people go through treatment, they go through the process, and it's not done, but there is it gets a little bit easier. I want to say, I don't want to say, sorry. It gets a little bit more tolerable.
more predictable, maybe.
Yeah, more predictable. That's a good way to look at it. But for others, it goes on for years and years and years, and they're struggling still and needing emotional support and feeling guilty for continuing to ask for it. They want to be the person that's giving the support, and yet they're winding up being in a position where they really still need it. And how do you process that? How do you come to terms with that guilt, and how can you help people, understand better the position that you still find yourself in that you really obviously don't want to be in?
I think that's a really beautiful question. And I think there's a lot of layers there. I think a lot of the experiences of parents undergoing this right now is areas of grief in losing expectations of a life that you thought you would be living, of the type of maybe support you were able to give to other people, maybe the way that you could have shown up for somebody. All of that is a piece of grief. And taking the time to really process that for yourself and to see what that means for you is so important. Giving yourself that time and space to think about the areas of your life that are hard right now and that you are grieving. And again, some of that might be processing with your close friends, with your family members, with other parents who understand and get it. might be with your psychosocial clinician. Maybe you have a really great doctor who listens to you and talks with you. Or again, maybe it's with a therapist. Thinking about your list of people who you can turn to, and also just naming it, naming that you're feeling the loss there, that you would hope and wish that things would be different and they're not, and giving space for that to be there. Doesn't make the situation change or different, but just naming it can give you some power to claim that. And then maybe find some other ways to find things that might be equally fulfilling, but might not look like giving support in a way that you would have thought. Maybe instead it's, talking, like just sending a text to somebody instead of maybe you would have hoped that you could have gone and been there in person with somebody. But maybe instead now at this point that you're in, it's just sending a text or commenting on somebody's Instagram post, or just finding these different ways of where you're at right now that feel doable to provide support. What are your thoughts, Larissa?
Yeah, no, I echo a lot of what you're saying, Kelsey, because I think it is, when these things go on for such a long period of time, there is, right, I find myself thinking about how grief used to be talked about as a linear process, right? We move through the stages and then, right, we exit the stage and we go off into the sunset. No one ever really described what happened, right? You just went through the stages in a linear way and that was it. And the reality is when, we go through any experience in our life where there's grief or loss, and that happens in pediatric oncology, regardless of what prognosis is, there is grief and loss from the minute that you walk into an emergency room or a doctor's office and hear that something has shifted and changed in just an exponential way in your life. There's a necessary processing that goes along with that of, not doing it once, but you might come up against it so many times. I mean, I think about, families that I work with, in both situations, right, who may have lost a child, right, their loss every time they watch that child's peers or their siblings hit, right, particular milestones in their life, and there's a child that didn't hit those milestones, grief and loss comes up again, right? For a child that may have survived their cancer, but may have lasting side effects, right? Every time you watch that gap widen between what your child is doing and what you thought they would do, or what you see their peers doing, right? That grief and loss comes up again, right? That, but that's also life. When we have losses in our life, right, and changes in our life, those things come up in so many ways. And learning these tools, I never want to be kind of the one who always hits the silver lining of these things, but I think, going through the experience of pediatric oncology teaches you a tremendous amount of life lessons. And I think it's, for those of us who really want to work in this space, that's often why, because there is this, the silver lining piece of it, of the priorities, right, that you sit in when you've been through an experience like this. But it can never be understated how important it is, like that processing piece and the awareness to know that what you are going through is a grief situation, right? And it requires processing again and again and at different milestones. And you are a different person each time you process it because you have grown and changed. So it looks a little different every single time, right? Those things I think are important.
That's a really good, really, really good point. Thank you. I did want to ask if you guys, I want to be mindful of everyone's time, everyone on the call, and Kelsey and Larissa, we thank you so much for being with us late on a Wednesday night. So thank you so much. But were there any final thoughts that either of you wanted to share? And Layla, did you have anything that you wanted to wrap up with?
No, I just want to again thank you, Kelsey and Larissa. This was amazing. What a grand finale to this series you have given us. I'm so glad we recorded this because I think I'm going to be watching it over and over to soak this all in. And those of you who are in attendance tonight can look forward to getting that email with those resources that have been mentioned are going to be coming out to you hopefully in just a few minutes after we wrap up. But But really, this was such a phenomenal night. We're so thankful for not just the time that you gave us tonight, but you two really, all that you put in year round with your families up at Dana-Farber and the Connections program and the way that you offer input into momcology programming. We're so grateful to have you on board. But especially tonight, we love having had this opportunity to share you with our families across the country and not just our Boston area families. So thank you so much for doing this. And I think our only wrap up to attendees beyond that is to thank you all for making the time to be with us this evening. And to let you know that the next series of Caregiver Lounge is already something that we're thinking about. So we'll be keeping an eye out in the fall.
One of the,
For email, for social media, for the lineup of new sessions and dates. We're excited to have you
Yep.
back. So thanks for sharing
Anne,
this first work with us.
Anne literally just said, please have more of these, and we will. We are looking forward to relaunching in the fall. So be on the lookout, as Layla said. So
We may
thank
be
you,
asking you for
everybody.
some feedback in the next few days, but thank you so much for your time. To our attendees and to Kelsey and Larissa again, thank you. So we
Have a
wish
great
you
night,
all a great evening.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.